Hello, this is Keith, the IT teaching guy. Today in school, we're learning about CPU sockets for the A+ compTIA exam. And what they went over with the CPU sockets, there being LGA socket or PGA socket. LGA stands for LAN Grid Array, and PGA stands for Pin Grid Array. So, going over the CPU socket provides the mechanical and electrical connection between a CPU itself and a motherboard, or what they call a PCB, which is a printed circuit board, which is a motherboard. CPU sockets are specific to motherboards, so you can't just switch out different sockets like that. So it's printed on the motherboard. AMD uses the term socket, while Intel also uses the term LGA for most standards. Going into Google here, we can see what they called an SECC in earlier processors like the Pentium 2. It was more of like an expansion card. You would just put it into a slot instead of a socket, and so you can see that older style there. But that didn't last very long, and they went back to socket again. So going on, we'll look at the LGA socket. It's a LAN Grid Array, and you can see how that looks when you put down your CPU onto the socket. You would have a bunch of little connectors like this. So those little connectors would line up with your socket right there, just as the same. And then you'd go to the pin grid array, and they would have a little bunch of holes, and on the CPU they would have the pins that would go into those holes. So prior to the year 2000, CPUs were known as LIF sockets, which stands for low insertion force, meaning you had to apply just a little bit of pressure to install the CPU. And if you apply too much pressure, you could actually break the pins that were on the CPU itself, and then it would be broken and no more. You couldn't use it anymore. Modern sockets actually have two types of connections: ZIF connection, which means zero insertion force. There's no force needed, just secured by a lever. And then there's the LGA sockets, are the same as ZIF sockets, just they have a metal plate covering over the CPU itself. So you can see here a picture of that metal plate, and the little bar on the side, if you can see that. So that would secure your CPU into the socket and onto your motherboard. And so that's all they had for CPU sockets and the information for that. Keep studying your A+, and check out freeaplus.com to go through your exams more thoroughly, and keep studying.